We're gonna go over strength training for the military, and we're gonna start right now. So when we're discussing strength training for the military, I also believe we can bring in tactical training. We can bring in law enforcement. All of these aspects, all of these areas are gonna require a lot of the similar styles of training. And the first thing that I really like to do is when I'm training someone who is working to go into the Navy SEALs or train and be tested to be part of the Navy SEALs, or if someone is going into the police academy, or they're going to West Point, or they're going to the Naval Academy, the first thing I do is I look at it through, so what are their specific tests? What are their requirements that they need to pass all these areas so that they can be successful? But then number two, what sports transfer really well? That's a simple way to look through the lens of their overall training. And I like to look at it specifically, okay, if we have a CrossFitter, or if we have a wrestler, or if we have anybody in combat sports for that matter, they're gonna transfer really well. I also even think looking at 400-meter runners, that's gonna transfer phenomenally over to the strength training for the military, strength training for law enforcement. And when we establish that lens, then we have to take that step back further, because the next thing I like to do, the third key aspect that I like to do is go, what are the biggest mistakes that I see when someone is training for the police academy, or if they're a police officer? What do I see as mistakes that someone might have when they're actually preparing to go to West Point? And I think that first big mistake is that a lot of individuals will say, I should train like a CrossFitter, but then all they're doing is standard CrossFit workouts. So they're literally just doing, WODs over and over again. So they get pretty good endurance, but they never actually focus on those 4 key areas that we're going to cover that every person needs to develop when they're doing strength training for the military. That first key area is that we want to focus on relative strength. And what is relative strength? Relative strength is going to be pound for pound strength. So that even means the bigger guys, the police officers, those bigger dudes that might be getting into their training, they even need to improve their relative strength. So if you get stronger pound for pound, your body becomes a little bit more efficient, and we can develop that pound for pound strength through higher intensity movements in the weight room. So let's say we're doing 6 doubles on back squat or 6 doubles on bench press, but we can also develop that by doing a ton of calisthenics. So we should be doing plyometric exercises, and we should also be doing a lot of pull-ups, a lot of rope climbs, a lot of high ring pull-ups. Those are the areas that we should really be focusing on when we're trying to improve our overall relative strength. That's gonna help our body be a little bit more efficient while also having a nice baseline of strength. And that's gonna lead us right into our second key area, which is going to be focusing on explosiveness. Some of the biggest failures that I see in strength training for military is that everybody's doing crazy endurance work, but they're never actually training to be as explosive as possible. We have to improve our jumps. We've got to think about the tests. We have to think about what happens if we're out in the field. We have to be explosive. We have to be extremely fast, and we have to be able to react very quickly. So we should be doing power-based training, impulse-based training. We should be able to produce a large amount of force in a very short period of time. And so that means doing dumbbell snatches, trap bar jumps, Olympic lifts if you're physically able to do Olympic lifts, a lot of plyometric work that's going to increase that rate of force development. And that means we're resting for 2 to 3 minutes in between sets. That's one of those common errors, is that a lot of people training for the military will go in and they'll do box jumps, but they're only resting for 10 to 20 seconds. So they're never actually increasing their impulse. They're never actually increasing their force production. So their jumps don't get better. They don't get more explosive. They just have really good endurance. And that leads us into that third key aspect, is that we do need to train endurance. Now, going back to that explosiveness, is that we also need to focus on those workouts that are going to increase our power production. So if we have 1 day a week where we're focusing on being more explosive, then we can have 1 to 3 days a week where we want to focus on our endurance. So in our endurance, we got to look at it as if we can establish this baseline. Maybe one day a week we do long, slow distance training so we can get on the assault bike and do 30 to 45 minutes at a specific RPM. Okay, so now that's establishing this tremendous baseline of endurance. And then as we get into that explosive based training or that relative strength based training, that helps us recover a little bit more effectively. And then we can have a higher power output for a longer period of time because of that LSD work that we're doing. And then we can bring in things like high intensity interval training for another day. We can do things like sprint interval based training on another day. So we can have 2 to 3 days of endurance based work that's coupled with that explosive work that's also dealing with calisthenics. That's the interesting part here, is if we look at it from the realm of we can do calisthenics, we can do explosive calisthenics, and we can do endurance-based training, and they all sort of complement each other really, really well. But when we want to focus on explosiveness, we need to adjust our rest periods. When we want to focus on relative strength, we need to adjust our rest periods and improve our mobility. When we want to focus on endurance, we want to train those 3 aspects of endurance: sprint interval-based training, high-intensity interval training, and that long, slow distance training. Now that's going to take us into that 4th key area, and this is where I think combat sports really can come into play with strength training for military. We need to have high levels of cognitive function under fatigue, okay? High levels of cognitive function under fatigue. When we see errors in law enforcement or when we see errors in strength training for military, we'll see individuals making poor decisions when they're extremely stressed, when they're extremely fatigued. So in training, if we can do LSD work or if we can do high intensity interval based training, and while we're doing that, we try to listen to something or we test ourselves to do specific math problems while we're actually training on an assault bike or while we're actually training on a rower or a ski erg or while we're running hill sprints. We challenge ourselves cognitively while we're under that stress of endurance. So now we bring in these 3 key physical areas, improving our relative strength, leading into that explosive based training, and then the endurance based training. And then while we're doing those 3 areas of work, we train our brain while we're under fatigue. If we can think about learning how to control our breath at high levels of intensity for long periods of time, that's going to lead to better mind control. When we have better mind control, we manage our stress better and we become better at performing our jobs, better at performing our tasks when we're in the military or when we're in law enforcement. So those are those key areas that you have to focus on, and you have to build your strength training around those 3 key areas, coupled by cognitive function training while you're under fatigue. If you need help with this, click on the link down below, head over to peakstrength.app. You can pick up our app today, and we have an entire area focused on military-based training. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.